The missile left its launcher at 3:17 local time on a Thursday that was otherwise unremarkable. The launch site was a prepared position on the outskirts of a coastal town south of Hudaydah. A concrete pad poured into a hillside recess 18 months earlier, optimistically reinforced, and used 3 times previously for launches that had demonstrated, with reasonable consistency, that ballistic missiles aimed at moving ships in the Red Sea have a relationship with accuracy that is best described as aspirational. The Khalij Fars anti-ship ballistic missile, an Iranian-designed, Iranian-supplied system that the Houthi movement had received in components and assembled under Iranian technical supervision over the course of approximately a year, rose from its launcher on a column of solid fuel exhaust and began the arc that its designers had calculated would deliver a modified warhead to a maritime target at a range of approximately 300 kilometers. The launch commander documented the firing time, confirmed the missile was on trajectory from the brief optical track available before cloud cover intervened, and began the process of relocating his team and their equipment. Before the surveillance systems he correctly assumed were overhead could develop an actionable picture of his position. He had been doing this long enough to be systematic about it. He loaded his radio. He loaded his targeting tablet. He was halfway to the vehicles when the missile reached its apogee above the Red Sea and began its terminal descent. What he could not know, what no Houthi commander in the coastal hills south of Hudaydah had any instrument to observe, was the tactical picture that had been watching his launch site since 2:44. A KH-11 reconnaissance satellite had flagged the position 11 days earlier, based on imagery analysis of construction activity consistent with a prepared launch pad. The position had been entered into the theater watch list and assigned a monitoring priority. At 2:44, a queued surveillance asset had detected thermal pre-launch activity at the site, the specific heat signature associated with missile handling and propellant conditioning, distinct from the ambient thermal background of a Yemeni hillside before dawn. The alert had gone out at 2:51. USS Carney, operating in the central Red Sea, had received the pre-launch alert and elevated its readiness posture at 2:53. 24 minutes before the missile left its launcher, the people the missile was intended to threaten already knew it was coming. This is worth staying with for a moment, because it is genuinely important and also genuinely funny in the particular way that very expensive planning meeting very complete surveillance always is. The Houthi launch commander had spent 18 months preparing his site, 11 months receiving the missile in components, 4 months assembling it under technical supervision, 3 previous launches building operational familiarity, and an unknown number of planning sessions developing the specific targeting solution and launch timing he had chosen for this particular Thursday morning. Against this investment, the U.S. surveillance architecture had responded with a satellite pass, an automated thermal detection algorithm, a 24-minute advance alert, and a watch team aboard USS Carney that had been expecting the launch for longer than it took to drive from the launch site to the nearest town. The asymmetry here is not primarily one of hardware. It is one of information. The Houthi launch commander knew where his missile was going. The U.S. knew where it was coming from, when it was leaving, and had a detailed plan for what to do about it before the ignition sequence completed. USS Carney had been operating in the Red Sea for 9 weeks. 9 weeks is long enough for the watch rotation to develop strong opinions about the coffee in the Combat Information Center. Opinions that, by week 9, have passed through the stages of concern, complaint, acceptance, and philosophical resignation into something approaching the specific equanimity of people who have decided that the coffee is simply a feature of deployment, rather than a problem requiring a solution. The Combat Information Center at 0317 smelled of that coffee and recycled air, and the faint electrical undertone of a sensor suite running at full operational load, which is the smell of an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer doing what it was built to do. The tactical action officer had been at his console for 2 hours and 11 minutes. The pre-launch alert from 2:51 had elevated the watch tempo from the measured rhythm of overnight patrol to the focused, slightly faster cadence of a team that has been told something is coming and is waiting for it to arrive. The difference between those two states is not panic. It is attention. Every display was being watched. Every system check was running on the compressed schedule of people who do not want to discover a discrepancy when the missile is already airborne. At 3:17:23, the SPY-1D phased array radar acquired the launch. The Khalij Fars had cleared the cloud layer at approximately 8,000 feet and entered the SPY-1D's clear tracking envelope. The radar had the contact's position, velocity vector, and altitude on the first return. By the second return, the fire control system was computing a trajectory solution. By the third return, it had a preliminary impact prediction. The whole sequence, contact acquisition to preliminary impact prediction, or NASTER, took 4.1 seconds. The missile was traveling at approximately Mach 3.5 and climbing. Here is where the story acquires the kind of tension that makes the outcome feel earned rather than assumed. USS Carney's preferred engagement geometry for a ballistic missile intercept uses the SM-3 block. 2A missile, a system specifically designed for exoatmospheric intercept, capable of reaching altitudes above the atmosphere and engaging ballistic targets in the mid-course phase of their trajectory, where the physics of intercept are most favorable. The SM-3 works best against a ballistic missile that is still climbing or at apogee, before it has begun the terminal descent that accelerates it and compresses the intercept timeline. Optimal SM-3 engagement geometry places the defending ship roughly perpendicular to the missile's flight path, at a range that gives the interceptor time to reach intercept altitude before the target begins its descent. USS Carney's position in the central Red Sea placed it 67 nautical miles southeast of the missile's projected impact point, which was 17 nautical miles further east than the optimal engagement geometry called for. Not impossible, not even close to impossible, but at that offset, the SM-3's intercept window was narrower than doctrine preferred. The engagement timeline was compressed by approximately 40 seconds compared to optimal, and one specific consequence became immediately relevant. The launch detection needed to happen at or before T-minus 40 seconds from the nominal launch time to ensure the SM-3 could reach intercept altitude before the target crossed into terminal phase. The pre-launch alert had come at 2:51. The actual launch was at 3:17, 26 minutes of warning. The 40-second margin was satisfied with 25 minutes and 20 seconds to spare. The positioning problem, which in a scenario without advance warning would have been a genuinely concerning constraint on the intercept geometry, had been rendered a planning footnote by a surveillance architecture that had been watching the launch site for 11 days and had transmitted a thermal pre-launch alert with enough lead time to reposition USS Carney if that had been assessed as necessary, to verify tracking readiness across every relevant system, and to brief the watch team on the specific intercept geometry they were going to execute. The tactical action officer had reviewed the intercept geometry at 0304. He had noted the 17-mile offset from optimal. He had noted the 40-second compression in the engagement window. He had verified that the SM-3's engagement envelope accommodated the geometry. He had logged his assessment. Intercept viable, parameters within operational limits, proceed as planned. Then, he had picked up his coffee, which was terrible, and drunk it, because that is what you do when you have 13 minutes before the launch you are expecting. The Khalij Fars reached apogee at approximately 91 kilometers altitude, above the line that most definitions place at the edge of the atmosphere, and began its terminal descent at 3:20:44. The SPY-1D was tracking it with the comprehensive precision of a system that does not lose contacts and does not hedge. The fire control solution was updating 400 times per second. The SM-3 Block 2A had been authorized for launch at 03:18:31, 71 seconds after the Khalij Fars left the ground, and was already climbing on its own intercept trajectory. The SM-3 Block 2A is a three-stage interceptor missile, not a missile in the conventional sense of something that flies toward a target and detonates near it, but a kinetic energy vehicle that releases a 40-kilogram intercept vehicle called the lightweight exoatmospheric projectile in the target's path and relies on the physics of collision at closing velocities above 10 kilometers per second to achieve intercept. The LEAP has its own onboard seeker, its own divert and attitude control system, and the specific quality of a device that has been engineered to perform a task, finding and hitting a target in space. That sounds straightforward in description and is extraordinary in execution. Hitting a ballistic missile in space with a kinetic vehicle the size of a small fire extinguisher, guided by a seeker system that has approximately 40 seconds of terminal homing time at closing speeds measured in multiple kilometers per second, is the kind of engineering achievement that deserves more recognition than it typically receives in defense coverage, which tends to focus on what the system cost, rather than on the specific improbability of what it does. The Khalij Fars, descending at Mach 8.2 in its terminal phase, was not aware of any of this. It was, in the strictest sense, simply following the trajectory its propellant and guidance system had established at launch. Its onboard terminal guidance, an Iranian-developed system combining GPS update and inertial navigation, designed to provide a circular error probable of approximately 150 meters against a stationary target, was doing its job, refining its aim point based on GPS updates and inertial tracking. Against a stationary ship, 150 meters CEP is a legitimate maritime interdiction capability. Against USS Carney, which was not a stationary ship and which had altered course by 14 degrees and increased speed to 23 knots at 0319 in a standard evasion evolution. 150 meters CEP against the pre-maneuver position meant the guidance was refining its aim at a location USS Carney would not occupy when the missile arrived. The guidance system did not know the ship had moved. The GPS constellation does not provide real-time tracking of evasive destroyers. The guidance was doing exactly what it was designed to do, against a ship that had declined to be where the guidance expected. The intercept occurred at 3:21:17 at an altitude of 73 kilometers above the Red Sea. The LEAP vehicle found its target in the terminal homing phase with the kind of quiet precision that kinetic intercept systems achieve when all the math has been done correctly. No detonation, no kinetic event in the conventional sense, just a closing velocity of approximately 11 kilometers per second, and the physics of what happens when 40 kilograms of engineered structure meets a ballistic warhead at that speed. The Khalij Fars ceased to be a coherent ballistic threat at 3:21:17. The debris field it produced was tracked by the SPY-1D for another 42 seconds before the largest fragments fell below the radar's surface clutter threshold and the contact picture returned to its baseline configuration. The tactical action officer logged the intercept time. He noted the engagement assessment. Successful. He noted the debris track. He noted that the ship's course change and speed increase had been executed as planned. He picked up his coffee. It had cooled to the temperature of the Combat Information Center air, which was approximately the temperature of active indifference. He drank it anyway. On the weather deck forward, a gunner's mate who had been on watch since 200 hours had heard and felt nothing during the SM-3 launch. The vertical launch system tubes are positioned well aft, and at 23 knots in a 14-degree course alteration. The forward weather deck has enough wind and mechanical noise to mask most events that are not directed specifically at it. He had been notified of the launch via the general announcing system at 3:18, and had acknowledged it with the body language of someone processing information, without updating their fundamental assessment of how the night was going. He was checking the seal on a forward deck fitting that the maintenance log had flagged. The fitting was fine. The missile had been intercepted. These two facts were, in his professional universe, both simply things that had happened on the same watch. He logged the fitting. He noted the time. He went back to his rounds. Now the intelligence picture, and this section is where the story becomes something genuinely rare in public defense coverage. The SLQ-32V3 electronic warfare suite had been in full collection mode from the moment the pre-launch alert was received at 0251. The Khalij Fars' guidance system, specifically its GPS receiver and its inertial navigation unit, produces electronic emissions throughout its flight that a properly positioned collection asset can record with the same fidelity that a sound engineer applies to a studio session. The GPS receiver's interrogation signature, the specific timing and frequency characteristics of how it pulls the satellite constellation, is a fingerprint for the firmware version installed in the guidance computer. The inertial navigation unit's emission pattern tells a story about the accelerometer package, its sensitivity, its calibration state, and its integration with the terminal guidance logic. These are not signals the Khalij Fars was intended to broadcast. They are the unavoidable electronic byproduct of a guidance system, doing its job in a radio frequency environment. And they are, to the SLQ-32, a graduate-level seminar on the missile's current technical configuration, what the collection produced. A complete GPS, receiver firmware fingerprint matched against the existing library, confirming this was the same receiver variant observed in the two most recent Khalij Fars launches from Yemeni territory, meaning the Iranians had not updated the guidance. Software between those launches and this one, which told the Theater J2 something about the pace of technical updates to the Houthi missile inventory. The inertial navigation emission profile showed a specific drift characteristic that the collection team would spend 48 hours analyzing against the missile's known trajectory, ultimately producing an updated estimate for the system's CEP against a maneuvering target that was more accurate than the previous estimate by a factor that the unclassified quarterly summary described as significant. A more accurate CEP estimate means a more accurate understanding of the threat, which means better calibrated defensive planning, which means that the Khalij Fars launch had, by providing the data to update the threat model, made the next Khalij Fars launch marginally less dangerous to the ships it was aimed at. The missile had spent its entire flight teaching the people it was trying to hit how to account for it more precisely. The boost phase emission was the most operationally valuable piece. During the first 12 seconds of flight, before the first stage burned out and separated, the Khalij Fars' rocket motor produced a specific acoustic and electromagnetic signature that the collection suite captured from the pre-launch alert posture's optimized receiving angle. The boost signature is what future early warning systems use to classify a launch in the first seconds. The specific characteristics of the propellant burn, the thrust profile, the nozzle geometry as expressed in the acoustic output. This launch provided a clean boost phase recording in conditions, close range, known geometry, prepared collection posture, that the Theater J2 assessment would later describe as the best single-launch Khalij Fars boost characterization collected to date. The launch commander south of Hudaydah had spent 11 months preparing the most useful, free intelligence contribution the Red Sea collection architecture had received in the current deployment cycle. He had relocated his team and equipment before sunrise and would never know the specific dimensions of what he had donated. The money picture is, as always, worth the calculation. The Khalij Fars program represents a substantial Iranian investment in anti-ship ballistic capability. The development cost, the production infrastructure, the technical supervision for Houthi assembly, and the per-unit cost of each missile delivered to Yemen through the supply chain that United Nations monitors have been documenting, with the frustrated persistence of people whose documentation is being read and ignored simultaneously. Per-unit cost estimates for the Khalij Fars, accounting for development amortization and Iranian military export pricing, run between $800,000 and $1.4 million, depending on whose analysis you use. Call it $1 million. The mission: close one U.S. Navy destroyer. The result: a debris field at 73 kilometers altitude, a GPS firmware fingerprint update, an inertial navigation drift characterization, and the best Khalij Fars boost phase recording in the theater collection archive. USS Carney's engagement cost: 1 SM-3. Block 2A at approximately $27 million per round, which is the figure that appears in the defense budget and which produces consistently a visceral reaction in anyone who processes it against the cost of what it intercepted. $27 million to neutralize a $1 million missile is a cost exchange ratio that makes Pentagon budget analysts reach for something stronger than the Combat Information Center coffee. The operational logic is sound. The SM-3 is not priced against individual threats, but against the strategic cost of allowing a single anti-ship ballistic missile to achieve its aim point against a forward-deployed destroyer. The math of protecting a $2.1 billion warship and its crew with a $27 million interceptor is, in those terms, straightforward. It is also in the terms of a spreadsheet that simply shows two numbers in adjacent columns. a ratio that prompts the kind of extended silence that finance professionals use when they have processed something and are giving it appropriate respect. Somewhere in the budget review cycle, a line item was going to have to be discussed. That discussion would involve people who had not been aboard USS Carney at 3/21/17 and who would bring to the conversation a perspective shaped primarily by the numbers. They were not wrong to have that perspective. They were simply working from a different data set than the one the tactical action officer had been working from. The Houthi media operations official announcement came at 8:30. The statement described a successful precision engagement by the naval forces of Yemen against American military presence in the Red Sea, confirming that a ballistic missile had been directed at a U.S. warship operating in Yemeni sovereign waters. The statement said the operation demonstrated the capability of Yemeni forces to reach and threaten American naval assets throughout the region. A spokesperson appeared on the affiliated broadcast network and elaborated on the strategic significance of the launch. The broadcast showed archival footage of a Khalij Fars on its launcher, the pre-launch preparation, the ignition, the climb. It was well produced. The footage cut away before apogee. The broadcast did not include any footage from the terminal phase of the missile's trajectory, because the camera the launch team had positioned to record impact had recorded. Instead, an absence, the empty water at the projected impact point, undisturbed at 3/21/23, when the missile's fragments were already falling through 70 kilometers of atmosphere, 15 miles to the northwest of USS Carney's actual position. The sea was flat. The ship was not there. The camera had recorded the correct location for the wrong ship at the wrong time, which is a summary of the guidance system's fundamental problem expressed through the specific medium of empty ocean footage. The broadcast did not use the empty ocean footage. Some footage is not useful for the narrative regardless of how well it is framed. USS Carney resumed its patrol at 0328, 11 minutes after the intercept. Course, standard patrol track. Speed, 18 knots. The tactical action officer filed the initial engagement report at 4:15 and the preliminary intelligence summary at 5:40. The intelligence annex noted the GPS firmware fingerprint, the inertial navigation drift characterization, and the boost phase recording. It noted the CEP update and its operational implications. It noted that the launch site coordinates derived from the boost phase azimuth, combined with the pre-launch surveillance data, provided a fix accurate to approximately 60 meters, better than any previous Khalij Fars site characterization in the current deployment area. The annex ran to 8 pages. It was distributed to 6th Fleet, Central Command, and 2 intelligence centers whose names do not appear in unclassified documents. At each destination, someone read the boost phase characterization section first, because that was the most technically valuable piece. And the people who receive these reports know which sections to read first. The gunner's mate completed his weather deck rounds at 4:30 and went below. He logged the fitting as serviceable. He made no mention in his log of the SM-3 launch, the Intercept, or the debris field, because none of these were in his sector of responsibility. And a maintenance log is not a diary. He noted the sea state, the weather, and the fitting. He signed the log. He went to find out what the galley was doing for the early morning watch meal, which turned out to be scrambled eggs that had achieved, in the assessment of everyone who encountered them, a texture most consistent with a material that had once intended to be eggs and had been interrupted partway through. He ate them. The Red Sea outside the porthole was flat and dark, the same as it had been before the launch, the same as it was going to be after the debrief, the same as it would be tomorrow when whoever replaced this launch team set up their equipment at a different site and began the preparation for the next launch, because the Houthi movement does not stop launching because one launch did not arrive. This is acknowledged. This is respected. The fact that the next launch will also be detected, tracked, characterized, and intercepted, and will also contribute a complete technical profile of itself to the collection archive in the process of not arriving, is the specific irony of the situation that none of the launch commanders in the coastal hills seem to have fully accounted for in their operational planning. The archive grows with every launch. The threat model improves with every intercept. The coffee does not improve. Some problems are outside the SM-3's engagement envelope. Bye for now.